Let's go.
You're listening to Making Data Simple, where we make the world of data effortless, relevant, and yes, even fun.
Listeners, welcome to Making Data Simple. Al Martin here. We've got another good collaborator, a good partner, a good IBMer today. Yes, it's IBMer again. And I know I go back and forth a little bit. Sometimes I have too much non-IBMers, then I'll have IBMers. It goes on and on, but we try to add balance. Today I have Dima Spivak, and he's the Director of Product Management for IBM StreamSets. Before he joined StreamSets, he joined I think in 2016, he's held various product management and engineering leadership roles, including being a software engineer at Cloudera. Dima, it's great to have you here. How you doing, man?
I'm great. So nice to be here. As I told you earlier, I've been actually a huge fan of the podcast for a number of years, long before I was an IBMer. So it's a real honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, fantastic. This is when you were with Software AG?
Yeah. So even before that, so I think the first Making Data Simple episode I ever listened to was back in 2021, where one of my now colleagues here at IBM was on, Jean-Claude Mamou was on your show, and it just somehow ended up on data engineering feeds. So yeah, been a big fan for a long time.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. How did you find your way here? Do you reach out to producers? I can't remember.
Yeah, I reached out to Catherine. I reached out to her because I was a fan, and then I actually reached out to her again because I loved the episode she had about her executive coach.
Yeah, that coach is actually my coach as well. Fantastic. The joke is I wore a jacket. Saturday Night Live in the U.S. If you know anything about Saturday Night Live, this is a show, and if you're on 5 times, they give you a jacket. It's the I don't know what they call it, but anyway,
5 Timers Club.
That's 5 Timers Club. Exactly right. So she's on 3 times, and I said I'd give her a jacket. Now I owe her a jacket. So, but I think we need to push it to 5 times. Anyway, so look, let us hear a little bit about yourself. What's your experience? Where have you been? What brings you to today? And then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I've definitely had a little bit of a non-traditional path to IBM. My background was actually, I was not a computer science major. I think a lot of folks who end up in software work as computer scientists, or they take programming. That wasn't me. My exposure was, I was a physicist. So I got into physics in high school. I decided at some point, hey, I want to be a physics professor. So I went to undergrad here in Northwestern University in Chicago, where I live. I went to grad school. My goal was get a PhD in physics, go become a professor. And partway through that, I decided, I really don't love this enough to live the life of an academic. And at that point, I reached out to a friend of mine who I'd been talking to, and he knew that I was kind of a bit of a computer nerd. And I said, yeah, I think I'll finish my PhD and move out to California and try to get a role in software. And he told me, hey, my startup is hiring right now. And that startup was Cloudera, which at the time was a real high flyer in the big data space. So I joined Cloudera in 2014. I had a lot of fun there, real crash course in being a professional software engineer. And then a couple of years later, when I was kind of looking for my next role, I heard from an old friend of mine from the Cloudera days who had at this point founded what was called StreamSets. And at the time, I was actually sitting on a different offer from a different company. But I said, okay, you know what, because of our relationship, let me go ahead and talk to you about the StreamSets thing. And by the end of that dinner, I basically said, all right, I'm signing. So I joined StreamSets. I joined as a software engineer. My goal was always just to learn to write better code. But then over time, I kept asking for more responsibilities. And for some reason, he kept giving it to me. And then just a couple of years ago, I moved on from being one of our vice presidents of engineering to heading up our product management function. And then at that point, we also had been acquired by Software AG. So this was in early 2022. We got acquired. And then just this past December, so end of 2023, news broke that IBM was acquiring StreamSets and one of our other companies within Software AG, which was called WebMethods. And as of July 1st, both of our companies are now part of IBM. And that's how I ended up here.
Fantastic. What sold you on StreamSets to begin with? You said you had dinner. What was the selling factor? What was the 2-minute pitch?
Yeah, I think the pitch he made, there's 2 things I really liked about it. One of which was the fact that the founders were both really experienced folks in the kind of data engineering space. So Arvind Prabhakar, who was the guy I had dinner with, he had been a director of engineering at Cloudera. So he had a lot of technical chops. He had a lot of leadership background in kind of the big data space. And his co-founder, who was the CEO, Girish Pancha, was actually the former chief product officer at Informatica. So I didn't have a concern that I was joining a company that didn't really know what it was doing, because you had these two really well-known industry veterans. And then the product itself was really interesting to me because it was trying to solve a problem that I had seen even at the Cloudera days, where at Cloudera, the goal was to build kind of the platform to end all platforms, which is what everyone seems to want to do all the time. But the thing that Cloudera was all about, or the thing that StreamSets was all about, was saying, you know what, platforms really come and go. The thing that never changes is that people always need to figure out how to get their data in and out of those platforms. And I think the approach StreamSets took was pretty novel in that way, and it was addressing some of the challenges that people had with doing that in the past. And so by the end of that dinner, as I said, I was sold on StreamSets.
You're in StreamSets today. You lead product management, correct? And
Yep.
look, well, let's dive into StreamSets then. First of all, I really like the topic today because you talk about making data simple. This is right in the data space. A lot of times we end up going all over the place. You know, like you mentioned when we started the call, I've got my coach on. We're talking about leadership, which I love too, by the way. All good. But now we're back to core data. So what is StreamSets? Let's start there. Very simple.
Simple pitch is that StreamSets, now called IBM StreamSets, is it's a streaming data integration tool. So what it's basically designed to do is it's designed to allow people to take advantage of the benefits of real-time data from a really simple drag and drop graphical interface. So if you're a user who sees business value to being able to process data as soon as it's generated and doing something with it, if there's a business outcome that will make your life easier or better or help your business grow and make more money, StreamSets is possibly a very good product for you.
Isn't the space here pretty crowded though?
It's definitely a crowded space. I think one of the things is that when people use a term like streaming, sometimes it's not entirely clear what they mean. So sometimes we'll be compared to other companies that don't take a streaming approach. They take an approach which sometimes the alternative to streaming is kind of the batch or bulk data integration approach. ETL is kind of usually in that category. So number one, it is a crowded space. There are a number of vendors who definitely play in the streaming data integration space. But what we often find when we actually go talk to customers, when we do proofs of concept, is that oftentimes the people we're up against are not exactly what we do. And that sometimes what we do really fits the customer use case. And sometimes we're not the best tool for the job. And so it's definitely an interesting problem-solving kind of environment to be in.
When are you the best tool for the job?
If you're a user where data is being generated somewhere, and let's say that being able to process that data, do something with that data in under 5 seconds can provide a specific amount of business value for you, that's a good place for StreamSets. So,
but that's like everybody, isn't it? That's like everybody.
Not necessarily. So, really good point. What I like to tell people a lot is that I often like to start by saying places where you don't need streaming data. So if your data integration challenge is that you need to get data from a bunch of different sources into a dashboard, but an executive only looks at that dashboard every morning, you probably don't need streaming data, because running that process once a night might be more efficient than having these long-running streaming pipelines. But if you're using it, for example, one of the canonical use cases for streaming data is around cybersecurity. If you want to be able to have data from logs in many, many different systems, and you don't just want to dump them into a data warehouse, but you want to put them into a real-time threat detection system. You want to put them into a security event and incident management system, because you want to act on threats as they happen. You can't have a long delay between data being generated and data being processed and kind of acted upon. That's usually a good place for streaming data.
But what is your response to the fact that, one thing we advise clients on now is not even to move data if you don't have to. In other words, let data sit where it is, and we'll go grab the data versus moving data.
People often refer to that as data virtualization. So that is definitely complementary to what StreamSets does. A lot of what we do around stream processing is specifically not just replication of data. That's kind of where StreamSets also comes into play, is that it's not just about streaming the data and just copying it and moving it from one place to another. In many cases, what's really valuable about what a tool like StreamSets can do is it also enriches the data. It can be selective about which fields from your records are actually being sent through. Those are things that we often hear from customers are why they pick StreamSets over either a bulk data replication tool or something that does data virtualization.
I think Forrester had a study out there. I think it was actually conducted on behalf of IBM, where 87% of organizations stated that they require data to be ingested and analyzed within 1 day or faster. So we're getting to the point where like everything's on demand. To your point, I don't know that everything needs to be on demand, but I think everybody wants data on demand. Is this a more expensive option than the batch load overnight, or is it the same at the end of the day? I mean, is there no difference? Why wouldn't I just go on demand versus have it batch process over that evening?
It's not necessarily more expensive. Oftentimes, the requirements are a little bit different. So, if you can imagine, when you're doing streaming data with long running pipelines, you have to have infrastructure running 24/7. So, if you are only populating a dashboard once a day, it might be cheaper to kind of do the on demand pricing of spinning up a cloud, a cloud instance, processing everything in an hour, and then shutting it down at the end versus keeping it running for 24 hours. And for that reason, a lot of these use cases that StreamSets finds itself in are where there's really a time critical component. Another one of these examples that we bring up a lot is kind of real time fraud detection is another use case for streaming data. Because with real time fraud detection, if somebody pays with a credit card, you want to be able to take the record about their transaction, do analytics on it really, really quickly, set a decision score, that kind of would flag if a particular transaction seems like it might be fraudulent and immediately do something about it. So that's another one of those instances where, one day is way too long in that instance. And in fact, one of the big banks in Europe that's been a longtime StreamSets customer, they have one of the shortest time it takes for someone to get a notification about a payment whenever their credit card is used at a terminal. And that whole process is based on StreamSets. So for them, it's less than 5 seconds. So every time someone swipes a card in a store in Italy or in France, they swipe the card. Within 5 seconds, they get an answer about, number one, if there's fraud detection, it'll be stopped. But moreover, they'll get a notification to say, hey, your transaction just went through, and that process behind the scenes is powered by StreamSets.
Is this all SaaS, or can it be on-prem? And does it work across all multi-cloud, hyperscalers, etc.?
Yep, it's a real mouthful. We sometimes call it hybrid multi-cloud, and what that basically means is that the way we deliver StreamSets is it's actually in this hybrid approach where we have a control plane that lives in the cloud, and that control plane can actually be deployed and it's managed by us on AWS, on Azure, on GCP. But then the data plane engines, the part that actually touches user data, users deploy that and manage that themselves. So just like how for a tool like DataStage, which is already part of IBM's catalog, we follow a very similar approach where users deploy these data planes wherever their data happens to live. And the only thing that goes back up into the SaaS is information about metrics, about the health of your pipelines, but the data itself stays in your customer environment. So we never see your data. And that is why a lot of our most popular kind of use cases for StreamSets do find themselves in regulated industries.
Here's the $1 million question. What's the secret sauce here? I mean, streaming isn't exactly new.
So I would probably say two things. So the first thing, which was something that we spent a lot of time talking about, is that StreamSets has a really clever way of dealing with schema in data. So one of the things we often will talk about is something called data drift, which is the idea, which some of it could be related to schema, where over time schemas can change and more traditional tools might choke on that. So if somebody happens to add a column into an upstream database, when a tool processes that data, if something is now different than the schema that it's seen in the past, the pipeline itself might stop and say, whoa, something here is unusual. So this is kind of the old style approach of building very kind of manual mappings from data, from source to destination. So that's kind of one thing, is that the way StreamSets works is we do something we call schema on read. As we read your data, we're actually interpreting record by record what that schema is. We can do alerting on it. We can do downstream events based on changes that happen, but the pipelines will always continue running. And so because of that, a single StreamSets pipeline can be built to support structured, unstructured, and semi-structured data sources. So that's one big part of our secret sauce. The other is that I mentioned that StreamSets is a graphical tool. So we, just like a lot of tools on the market, we support this kind of approach where you have a pipeline canvas, you drag and drop these connectors and tiles to signify workflows. One of the things StreamSets does that's unique, though, is that we don't force you to only do that kind of low code or no code approach. We actually also play really well with scripting. So you can actually mix and match those drag and drop stages alongside scripting in Groovy and Python and JavaScript. And we also have a really full-featured SDK for Python. So if the graphical thing doesn't scale for your use case, you can write a Python script that can build 25,000 pipelines for you in a few minutes by going through a for loop. So I say those kind of encompass two of the things I would say are our secret sauce.
Now, one thing I like to do on the podcast is to keep us all honest here, at least the best of our ability. Say you're working for Informatica right now. Sorry, man, but you're working for Informatica. What are they going to say? What's their counter to this? And then what's your counter to their counter?
I think they would counter and say, well, it's not just about moving data and transforming data. The management of data is really important. And Informatica does that. So Informatica has this Informatica Data Management Cloud. And they would say, well, just being StreamSets, that's not enough because there's more to data than moving it from one place to another. To which I would say, well, it's a good thing we're at IBM now. Because at IBM, with the data fabric capabilities that we have within data and AI, I think we can make a really good argument that we have the single most competitive offering from data movement, data transformation, push down data, data cataloging, lineage, observability, quality, all of those kind of capabilities can all be had in a very unified experience within IBM. And I don't think anybody, even Informatica, as great as they are, I don't think they can hold a candle to that.
Data fabric tends to be, like you said earlier, a mouthful, meaning it can mean a lot of different things. It's a big piece. Could you expand upon that a little bit? I mean, where does StreamSets fit in? I mean, if I go talk to a client on data fabric, the problem with data fabric is most people get it, but you still got to explain it. Why does it make sense for an acquisition of this type for StreamSets to fit into the larger ecosystem of IBM's data offerings?
Yeah, because I think to your point, so ultimately, data fabric is kind of an architecture that focuses on how do you connect data from many, many different sources to many different destinations to solve business problems, and how can you do it in an intelligent way, in a way that has governance and trust that doesn't make your compliance team go crazy. And I think where StreamSets fits in is that the reality is that there's just different tooling that's needed to be most effective for different use cases. So in some examples, IBM data replication is a great solution if one of the things you need to do is real-time, ultra-low latency replication of an operational database to a data warehouse. If you have a batch workload where you want to do big set-based transformations, IBM Data Stage does a really good job because it allows you to build these pipelines, run them intermittently or on a schedule. That works really, really well. But I think the gap that IBM has had for a very long time in its data fabric offering has been in this real-time streaming space. So it's a little bit slower than data replication, but it's much faster than and more responsive, I guess I would say, than something like Data Stage. And it's what we just see there is that there are a lot of use cases that fit into that niche. And I think you need to have that whole picture to really have an end-to-end data fabric that doesn't force people to then look for other solutions, have to integrate them with these tools, which is where, ultimately that's where the rub is how do you integrate all these things in a consistent way?
I have to ask you, you mentioned Data Stage. Data Stage can't do this?
So Data Stage is much more of a traditional kind of batch ETL tool. It's incredibly powerful. And I'll often tell people that for the kind of use cases people want to use it for, it tends to be significantly more performant than StreamSets because it does make certain assumptions about schema. But because of that, a Data Stage pipeline is not usually intended to be a long-running kind of pipeline. It tends to sort of read data from a particular origin. Once it's processed all that data, the pipeline stops. And that's just not the way StreamSets work. So the average StreamSets pipeline can run, in many cases, we've had customers running individual pipelines for years on end because they're backing these kind of business critical use cases. So it's just a different paradigm for different use cases, I would say.
What about AI? StreamSets well set up for AI, or is it apples and oranges?
StreamSets is very well suited to AI. I think that a lot of the things that we're getting a lot of questions about these days can't have AI without IA. So I'll repeat that here because I really do believe it. For StreamSets in particular, I think there's going to be a number of AI-based use cases that are going to be really interesting. You hear a lot about retrieval augmented generation. You hear about instances where people need to continue tuning models with data as it comes in because they want to, the context window has to be greater than just what you get from data that is potentially stale. So I think those are places where StreamSets will definitely fit into the IBM AI story. But beyond that, I think there's also a lot of interesting things around a tool that's focusing on the developer experience, where the way we begin integrating AI into our product itself will start being something we talk about in the not so distant future. And I think that's going to be another place where both how StreamSets enables you to use AI as well as how StreamSets itself uses AI to make data engineering easier I think both of those are pretty interesting threads.
When I'm thinking of StreamSets, one thing that's also coming to mind is like Internet of Things, sensors, a lot of different endpoint data elements that need to be real time. Is StreamSets well suited for that type of use case?
It can definitely be suited for those kind of use cases. So StreamSets itself has to run on a machine that supports the JVM. So we don't typically see it in these kind of embedded use cases where you have to run it on the hardware itself. But one of the things we've seen a lot of use cases with is where organizations are already shuttling the data from all kinds of devices, all kinds of sensors to something like a Kafka topic. And in their case, once it's in that topic, they kind of say, well, I need something then downstream of that Kafka instance to process the data, to send some of it to a data warehouse, to send other parts of the data to an operational system, to an analytical system. And StreamSets is really good at that. I would say one of the things we definitely excel with is our ability to read from and write to Kafka. It's definitely been one of our core competencies for a number of years.
Who is your biggest competitor right now?
So I would say we see a lot of Confluent out in the space. Confluent was started as an offshoot of LinkedIn, the original creators of Apache Kafka. We do see Confluent in the market a lot. We also do see other vendors who are doing, in many cases, that are more suited for that batch ETL pipeline scenario. But we often find ourselves still competing with them because our users do love our user interface so much. And they do love the extensibility, the ability to go beyond a graphical interface. So we do see other competitors. We see Informatica. We do see Fivetran. We see Matillion out in the market. So kind of all the folks you would normally see in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for data integration tools, we do tend to run into them in the market quite a bit.
What would you say is the most unknown or misunderstood thing about StreamSets or real-time streaming?
I would say that the most misunderstood is the idea that everything is a streaming data use case. Kind of going back to what I said earlier, sometimes just the word streaming, just the conversational aspect, people say, well, I need to stream my data from this database to my data warehouse. And oftentimes, if you kind of get into it and you say, well, once the data is in your data warehouse, what do you want to do with it? And they say, well, we want to use it to train models later. We want to do auditing on that data. Oftentimes we'll say, well, you know what? It might not be the most efficient thing to be streaming it in real time. If you're only filling up a data source or a data destination in this way, it might actually be more performant for you not to use something like StreamSets, because where we really shine is in those use cases where the real-time data is actually business critical and really drives business value for those use cases.
Any other use cases you'll mention, or maybe your most interesting use case as of late?
Yeah, one of the really interesting use cases has to do with logistics. That's another place where batch pipelines don't work very well. So there's a pretty big logistics provider in Europe that's looking at expanding their use of StreamSets. And their use case is really fun because it's exactly what you'd imagine for a logistics use case. They have data coming in all the time about weather conditions, about the departure times of planes and of trains and things like that. And ultimately, they have to be able to bring all this data together to make decisions about routing of packages. So that's something where you can't run a pipeline every hour, because by the time your pipeline runs, your package is already on the wrong plane because a delay it's ultimately going to delay the package. So that's one of those other use cases, which is really kind of a pretty famous one is the logistics use case for real-time data. And it's something that people can connect to because nobody likes when they're expecting to get something cool at home just to find out that the package has been delayed by a day.
Anything that we didn't mention that you'd like to say more about in terms of StreamSets?
I think one of the things that we're also really excited about with StreamSets is that, as I said, our core competency has always been around streaming data, but because we found ourselves in so many of these business critical use cases, we've often had customers ask about, well, when are you going to add lineage into your product? When are you going to add observability or data quality into your product? And so I think one of the things we're most excited about within the product team at StreamSets is that in many ways, by joining IBM, we can really focus on what we know we do really well, which is this streaming data pipelines use case. And so we're super excited about some of the plans we have around integration into the rest of the data fabric, because I think it's gonna make our lives better, and it's gonna make the lives of our customers a lot better.
Where do you think we're going? What do you think we're going to see 5 years, maybe even 10 years from now?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more AI augmented kind of data engineering in general. You're seeing it
Like
already where obviously
synthetic data, or
actually both. So I think that synthetic data is super interesting because I think if you can get all of the analytical benefits of data without the privacy concerns that happen when you're shuttling sensitive data back and forth, that could be really interesting. And I think synthetic data is a big part of that. So that's one piece of it. But I also think that adding AI to how data engineers work, I think will be super powerful because one of the things we definitely see a lot is that as organizations start adopting tools like StreamSets, they end up building thousands, if not tens of thousands of pipelines. And it becomes kind of a management problem. You have these things that run all the time that are supporting a significant part of the business. Even as these pipelines themselves are self-documenting because they're graphical, there are a lot of things that users will down the line have to think about as they're managing the lifecycle of that pipeline. And I do think AI is going to make that a lot easier. I do think that AI is going to start allowing users to query pipelines about intent in ways that you don't see just by looking at a pipeline. You'll be able to ask your dashboard, show me all the pipelines that have processed more than the average amount of data in the last day, or show me a pipeline that seems slower than it should be based on historical trends. And I think that's going to make the lives of data engineers more productive. And I think it's also going to lead to even more creativity about how they can use some of these data pipeline technologies.
But I did notice when I was looking through your background, you have a strong focus on testing and quality.
Yep.
One example is the Apache Software Foundation committer. How do you think quality and testing is going to change?
I think it's going to change in a huge way. I think that, even within StreamSets, it's something we're exploring internally for our use cases. But I think that a lot of what being a really good software engineer that focuses on testing does is a lot of it really is pattern recognition. It's putting yourself in the shoes of a customer. It's following these best practices and trying to uncover things before the customer has to. And I think given enough data, it'll be pretty easy for AI to generate test cases. It'll eventually get to the point where it's generating full frameworks. It'll generate intelligent ways to run the tests so that you're being efficient in your use of resources and engineer time. So I really do think that if there's one part of software engineering outside of everyone talks about these co-pilots showing up in your IDE, I do think that AI is going to have a really big impact on test engineering in general and quality in the software industry as a whole.
Nice. Look, nicely done. I am curious. You were acquired by Software AG. How big was that company when they acquired you?
So StreamSets was 300 people. Software AG as a whole was 5,000 people.
5,000 people. So then you get acquired by IBM. What has this felt like? And look, you're welcome to say, look, this is an open podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Where's your head at now with IBM? Excited to be here? Where are you nervous? I'm just curious as to your experience.
We're incredibly excited to be here. We had a great time at Software AG where, you're not going to hear, I tend to be a very positive person, so I'm not necessarily going to badmouth anything, but I will say it is really nice to be at a company where when I say the name to a family member, they've heard of the company. And despite Software AG being a really historic company, it's been around for over 50 years. It is a German-based company, so many folks don't really know what they do. And I think they are in the midst of quite a bit of a reshuffle. So I think even Software AG right now is trying to figure out what they do.
But IBM, this is a big, big ocean.
It's been really neat. There's a lot to learn. I am a sucker for kind of the big American company. And so, I've always been a big fan of companies like Boeing and a Ford and those guys. And I think IBM is kind of the flagship American software engineering story in my mind, both from historical as well as just, how do you manage a company with so many people? And I think we've been, I won't say surprised, but it's been a very pleasant realization as we've gotten here to IBM, just how smart people are, just how passionate they are. Because I think in many cases, people think of these kind of the FANG companies. They think, well, that's where innovation happens. That's where all the smart people go. When we were in the process of getting acquired, I was sitting at lunch with Scott Brokaw, one of my peers now within the product management team in Data Fabric. And I said, you seem pretty smart. Why are you here at IBM? And he laughed. He said, that's a great question. Because, when I asked around the table, everyone had been at IBM for over 10 years. And I said, why are you still here? And he said, you know what, honestly, it's never boring. There's so many problems to solve. You get such an opportunity to see different problems. You're never kind of shoehorned into one space, and you just get to learn a lot. And I think even 2 months in, I'm definitely feeling that way.
Everybody comes through an acquisition. I came through an acquisition just as well. Happened to be Informix, happened to be data. And I stayed in data for a long time. That's why I've got an interest in data and still believe it's like the nervous system of everything we do. It's the oil, absolutely the oil. It's going to continue to be the oil. But I think it's the people, because I would have asked myself, I would have never thought that I would have stayed at IBM, and now I've been here too many years to say. But it's the people and the opportunity, meaning the technology is amazing. Amazing. We don't often market ourselves or the way that we should. It's such a big company. It's hard to market, but we've made it tons of different pivots. AI is going extremely well, but it's just also the opportunity, the different places you can go. I mean, you stay with the same company and you could be leading a whole different division. Myself, I've spent most of my career in development, that being leading support, leading our data and AI business, went and led services business, and now lead tech sales. I mean, that's pretty exciting when you think about it. But at the end of the day, it's the people. I think these are such good people. You leave jobs, but you don't leave families. There's good days and bad days like everybody has. What worries you? There's got to be something that worries you, though.
I think the one thing that definitely worries me is not losing kind of that startup mentality that we've had at StreamSets. Even through the first acquisition by Software AG, we still had this sort of sense that individual contributors really feel like they can move the needle. Somebody can come into my product management team meeting and say, hey, I know this hasn't been part of our strategy or part of our vision, but I think there's something interesting going on with this. Have we thought about doing that? And I hope that stays that way, that people don't feel like the politics of being at a big company changes how they feel comfortable kind of opening up in that way.
It can be big business. We're targeting the enterprise. So there's some areas there, but I don't know if you've read the book, The Geek Way, but it's a super good book.
I have.
We're working to, okay, great, to embody the 4 concepts there, which is really speed, ownership, science, and openness. And look, it depends on the day, but we're really pushing every one of those areas. So hopefully you find it to be refreshing and you're able to maintain that startup mentality. Hey, what do you do for fun?
So I've got 3 little kids. I've got a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a just turned 1-year-old. So
I'm surprised you're even here.
I'm just glad they're not jumping all over because I'm in the basement here in my house in Chicago. When I'm not being climbed on by them, you can see my background. I do play chess. That was my COVID passion. I got really into chess back there. So I do chess, and then I'm also kind of a musical person. So just outside of this room, I've got a rack of guitars. I've got a drum set. I've got bass guitars. I've got all the things to make noise when no one's home.
Is there any like apps that you use for guitars or anything? Anything you follow? I mean, where do you get your information? How do you learn?
I took lessons when I was younger. I actually took classical guitar for a number of years. Other than that, I mean, you can find all kinds of tablatures online of just any songs you might want to learn. Lately, I've been much more into drums, and I think for that, you put on a song, you have headphones that will protect your hearing, and you just slow. Sometimes you will slow things down. There's some apps.
So do you like play every instrument?
Not every instrument. I play some. I come from a musical family, so it was always value. So I played piano growing up as well. So now my 6-year-old's playing piano, so I can play piano better than her, but I'm sure that's not going to last that long.
Wait. So hold on. Piano, guitar, bass, drums. What am I missing?
When I was in high school, I was a singer in some. So
you've got the whole thing then. You can be your own band.
That was one of my. So when I was in high school, I was one of those folks who I had a recording studio in my basement, like a really lo-fi kind of studio, and I would basically use a multi-tracker and I'd play the drums, I would add guitars, I would add bass, I would sing. I don't have time for that anymore, but that was definitely something I was into as a kid.
And any apps you use for chess?
I play on Lichess a lot. So lichess.org is the world's most popular open source chess engine. So they've got a really good app. So my wife is constantly pointing out, like, are you playing chess again? Because I'm sitting on the couch while she's watching TV and I'm just playing like a 1-minute bullet game on my phone against a bunch of strangers. So I definitely spend more time on that than I like to admit.
Have you seen the Queen's Gambit?
That's what got me into chess during COVID. When that came out, I played chess as a kid, but not very seriously. And then when I saw that, I was like, I've always liked chess. I should really get back into it. So I got a chess coach over COVID, just virtual lessons online. So it was a fun. I was really into it for a good couple of years there.
What's true? Nobody agrees with you.
That is a great question. This is like the Peter Thiel contrarian question, right?
Yeah.
So I think So something I've felt recently, and actually since I got to IBM, I would say this, is that if you're ambitious, I think communication is more important than aptitude. Because what I've definitely found, to your point that IBM has so many smart people, is that at some level, being good at your job is kind of table stakes. You need to be curious, you need to be intelligent, you need to know what you're doing. But what I definitely see is that the people who are ambitious, who seem to grow a lot, are the ones who focus especially on communication and sort of recognizing that working together is really key to growth, that kind of being in the basement heads down can only go so far, and that the more you can influence people, the more you can get people to recognize a vision and kind of row in the same direction, the more successful you'll be. So I would say that if you're ambitious, communication more important than aptitude. If you want another jokey answer, it's one important truth that very few people agree with you on is that the capital of Australia is not Sydney. I find that so many people believe the capital of Australia is Sydney or Melbourne. Almost nobody knows the capital of Australia is Canberra.
Good. I don't think I knew that. I've been there many times.
There you
Nicely done. Any book that you would recommend?
My favorite book is a business book. It's there's a book by Bryce G. Hoffman called American Icon, and it tells the story of when Alan Mulally went to Ford Motor Company right around the time that the auto bailouts were going on, and it talks about how the thing that he really did. So Ford was the only one of the big three auto manufacturers that didn't have to go bankrupt. They didn't have to take government funds. And the book lays out a really good case about how his leadership and the way that he brought people together was really key to that. So I've recommended this to every product team that I've ever run, is to say, read that book, because it's inspiring to see what you can do working together that you can't just do as an individual contributor.
But didn't he shed a lot of brands? They had all kinds of stuff like Jaguar and all kinds of, he started shedding them right and left.
Yeah, Aston Martin, ultimately they got rid of Mercury. I think that was kind of the key to their success, is that Ford became a house of brands and that they weren't focusing on their core competency. So I'm using that term again because this kind of comes back to, I see some parallels even with StreamSets, is that you can get distracted and try to do things that maybe you're not well suited to do. And I think that's what they found with Ford, is that they weren't focusing on the Ford brand and the thing that made Ford special. As soon as they focused on that, they focused on building the best product. The company turned around and it went from, losing almost $20 billion to, record profits within just a few years.
Fantastic, man. Thank you for being here. Awesome podcast, Dima. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Real honor.
You're welcome back anytime. And listeners, hit us on almartintalksdata@gmail.com. Until next time, we'll see you on the podcast. Bye-bye.